Record button. Wonderful. And we are officially here. So good afternoon, and apologies again to everybody for the slight delay in the kickoff of this session. But for those of you who tune in regularly, you will know that as a result of my technology skills, we tend to start always a couple of minutes earlier. Because however much I try to start 10 minutes earlier, my technological skills set me back at least 15, 20 minutes. So I need to continue working on this. But thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for bearing with a IT dinosaur like myself. And thank you very much to all of you for joining us today for another episode 3 of Atlantic Forum's NATO 2030 discussion series. Where today we are focusing on NATO, on defending NATO's eastern flank. So for those of you who don't know Atlantic Forum, we are a grassroots NGO which has been started back in 2019, and which focuses on trying to promote transatlantic engagement and work with a future generation of transatlantic leaders on both sides of the Atlantic, and indeed to strengthen our alliance and the bond that holds us together. And to that end, I'm very happy that today, as part of our discussion, I have two, at least for me, certainly good friends and colleagues who I always enjoy discussing with, to talk about NATO's eastern flank and what the alliance and members of the alliance are doing to secure this important flank of NATO. So I'm really delighted that today I have with me Captain John Jacobs of the Dutch Army, and also my fellow co-founder of the Atlantic Forum. Good to see you, John. We have Piret Kuusik, who's a researcher at the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute, which is part of the International Center for Defense and Security in Tallinn. Good to see you also, Piret. Hi. And another good friend of mine, Pavel Havlicek, who's a research fellow at the Association for International Affairs in Prague. Unfortunately, we're all supposed to be joined by Alexandra Brzozowski from Euractiv, but sadly she cannot join us today. But Alexandra is still with us in spirit, and I hope she can join us for another discussion in the near future. Now, in the previous discussions, we focused on the priorities for NATO over the coming years, especially given the new administration in Washington. 3 weeks ago, we also discussed the question of China, what kind of a challenge China poses to the transatlantic space, and how we can respond jointly. Also, how NATO can adapt to the challenge of China, what role it can play in this role. And today we are tackling a slightly different beast, and it's a big hairy beast, the Russian bear, which is certainly a challenge that has been there for NATO. If it has been very much the raison d'etre for NATO's existence when it was created to defend the democratic world against the possibility of Soviet aggression during the Cold War. And so today we'll be talking. We won't necessarily talk so much about history, but we'll talk about the threat, or rather the challenge that Russia poses today, and what the alliance and the member states are doing to address it today, and what gaps there are, and how we can continue to strengthen our own resilience, our own security with regards to the threat posed by Russia. And maybe on that note, I'll kick off with Pavel, because Pavel, you're a keen Russia watcher, and in fact, every day I have to say I turn on the radio or TV, certainly the Czech radio, every morning I have it on. You're always there, and it's always good to hear your perspectives on the latest developments. And I was wondering, actually, maybe if you can start us off sort of with a broader context, because obviously relations between Russia and NATO has always been complicated. But certainly since the annexation of Crimea and the war and Russian aggression in the Donbass, that relationship has been deteriorating even more. And I suppose my question to you is, what kind of a challenge if we were to define the challenge or the threat that Russia poses? I mean, I'd be very curious to hear from you how you would define it. Because I was just reading actually the Integrated Defense Review, which the UK just published. And actually it was very interesting. I mean, on one hand, the Defense Review clearly states that Russia is, for the UK and for the NATO alliance, the most acute threat. It also put Russia in the same box as Iran and North Korea, the so-called axis of evil, as they used to be called a decade or two ago. So I'm wondering, how do you see actually this threat, and how would you define it?
Thank you so much, Igor. I will be very happy to kick off this discussion. Thank you so much for inviting me and Amo to participate in this debate. I will, maybe if you allow me, I will speak a little bit more broadly about like the Western relations with Russia, because I think that's a very exciting chapter. It's sometimes a frustrating chapter, but I feel that this is also something that we might actually start with. Obviously, if you and colleagues were following the recent developments in the NATO, Russia, EU, Russia, the US and Russian relations, you might have seen really starkly deteriorating the tendency trend in the bilateral relations. We have seen that on multiple accounts, which also comply and correspond with the threat that we actually see from Russia today in March 2021. If I'm to speak very briefly about the recent months, you have obviously noticed, you have seen what has been happening in Russia itself, with the attempts to make a sort of a transition or let the Russian regime stay in place. You might have heard about, the attempt to poison Alexei Navalny, the biggest challenger and opponent of the Putin's regime. You might have also heard about, the recent visit of the High Rep of the EU to Moscow just earlier last month, at the beginning of February. And yes, you have done. For sure, and so you have seen all these tendencies that are just to illustrate the deteriorating trend in bilateral relations. At the same time, obviously, there is a sort of a new development. Not only after the Borrell's visit, and calibration of the EU-Russia partnership, but also a new tendency in the US-Russian relations, with the new Biden administration, which is positioning on Russia a little bit differently. It is very much emphasizing the democracy and human rights tone in the bilateral agenda, but at the same time, you might have also heard about, the extension of the bilateral treaty on the nuclear weapons and the INF treaty. So obviously there are new developments, but the overall tone is very much the same as we have seen it since 2014 and the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, against Donbass, but also the illegal annexation of Ukraine's Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, which really set the new tone into also what we will be discussing, and in terms of the resilience, of the Western world, Western alliances, both both NATO, but also the European Union, and their sort of wake-up calls, that Ukraine provided for many in the West to actually start treating Russia seriously once again, to see to start seeing that as a serious threat, which is immediate, which is seen on an everyday basis, where Piret actually sits in Estonia, but much less when you come to Prague and Bratislava, and even less if you go to the Benelux countries, to Spain or possibly Ireland and elsewhere, you know. So then obviously what is the important factor that we need to be discussing is you know, the common understanding of Russia as a threat. This is the high level position and interpretation of Russia as a threat. If we actually have a common understanding of what Russia is, what Russia does to us in the West, that's the first level. Obviously, then you have the sort of the day-to-day level of the threat, the perception of, you know, the Russian malign activities. We might be discussing about hybrid threats. We might be discussing about disinformation, our response, you know, to that. We might be discussing about cyber crime and cyber security. Just today, we saw some news from you know, more Czech hospitals and clinics actually being hacked by hackers from both Russia and China. So these are very worrying signs. These are sort of the day-to-day level of the threat. And then obviously you have also the general perception of the citizens, you know, and their own resilience, this social resilience, you know, that you have also when it comes to, for example, integration of the Russian diaspora in our Western societies, that you have in also in sort of you know, perception of Russia in the society. You might have heard about cases in Germany and elsewhere where Russia, through its community, the Russian diaspora, but also through disinformation, was able to mobilize in this famous Lisa case, you know, the German population to actually go out to streets, you know, to really cause riots, you know, to cause demonstrations and so on. So this is the level of the society, the people's level, right? So how they are actually protected, how what is also what is the level of the threat from Russia to every single one of us, you know, sitting in different capitals around Europe and elsewhere. So I see the threat now posed by Russia as a multiple one. You know, we can be discussing details. We can be also discussing the future prospects of the Western relations with Russia on different in different dimensions, as I was discussing about the United States, the EU, but also individual member states. You know, I can be bringing here the Czech perspective, which is also very interesting. But I will now give the floor back to you, Igor, and I will be happy to complement and go in more detail in each of these three dimensions, at least that I see on the threat perception level. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavel. That was, I think, an excellent and comprehensive digest of indeed the challenge out there, and certainly it's you know, it's not just a sort of a straight, simple cut challenge that we are facing. And I mean, on that note, maybe a question to both of you, Piret and John. We talked about, you know, trying to sort of define this challenge, this threat, but also, I mean, NATO has been, and the member states have been responding themselves. I mean, we've had certainly since the Cardiff NATO summit and the Warsaw summit, we've had sort of sustained efforts by the alliance to beef up its capabilities. I mean, we also had Trump, but not sure that was necessarily related to defense of the eastern flank, but you certainly had Trump's continued insistence on the European NATO members fulfilling the 2% obligations. But I was wondering actually if you could maybe provide you know, I suppose it's a question to both of you. You know, maybe give us an assessment, your assessment of sort of the steps that NATO and the member states have taken over the past few years in terms of boosting the eastern flank. I mean, in terms of the enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states, increasing focus on interoperability, military exercises, but also more focused sort of political consultations, which are also which have also been highlighted in the new NATO 2030 paper, and I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later. And I guess, you know, whether you think that the steps that have been taken so far have actually been sufficient. You know, do they sufficiently address the wide spectrum of challenges that Pavel has highlighted? I mean, I don't know, maybe Piret, if you would like to kick us off.
Right. I think I'll start with the kind of regional and what the Baltic countries do, and then move up from there. In terms of when we talk about the division of labor between international organization and the member state, then it is only natural that everything kind of starts with the member state. We cannot expect the organization or other countries basically do some of the kind of the work for us, right? It's just with in the Baltic question, the trouble is that whatever we will do will never be enough, and so in that sense, even with our best efforts, it's not enough. And so when we kind of talk about how in 2021 we think about the Baltic security dilemma or what goes on in the region, then everything kind of goes around the idea of deterrence. So essentially, all our efforts are made in the hope that we will never have to do the conflict itself. And in that sense, I was recently reminded by one of my former strategic studies professor that when you do deterrence, you also don't want the end to be determined, even in your kind of head. So in that sense, whatever we do here and with our allies, we always want to keep the end open to interpretation, in the sense to keep that insecurity of how a conflict in this region might end still up in the air, or like maintain that insecurity. But when we kind of think about, so when the Baltic countries, in what they've done since 2014, one is to ensure that deterrence holds, and the other one, when we do get to this situation of a conflict, we have understood that the division of labor is such that we just need to hold on until someone can or is willing to come in support of us, and the alliance would come. And so most of our efforts kind of go into that, and it is not an easy task. There are plenty of studies that put exact numbers on how long will the Baltic states last and how long does it take them to get to Tallinn, and so on and so forth. But this is what we are here trying to improve on. So holding the fort, essentially. But what the three Baltics have done? So for one, yes, EFB is here. If you go to, I tend to make this joke, I don't know how much is a joke, it's actually a real fact, but when you go to Tapa these days, and I tend to go a lot because my country house is quite near to Tapa, it feels like Berlin probably in 1949 maybe. So you go to a train station and there are Brits and there are French and all sorts of other type of people in a small Estonian town. So in that sense, it's very odd to think of, because you never expect to hear, "Hold on, mate," in a kind of a small eastern town of Estonia. But that means that these people, the EFP forces, they also need to be welcomed in Estonia. So a lot of Estonia's efforts have gone into host nation support. And it doesn't sound particularly exciting, but there is a difference, having that many people in our bases means that we just didn't have the infrastructure for it. So a lot of it has been about building roads and barracks and acquiring land to build barracks and so on. So a lot of it has has gone into this to be able to host the EFP forces. And the same also applies to Ämari Air Force Air Base as such, to be able to get the alliance's air forces, be able to welcome them there and provide them the services that they need. Another big happy moment was when the multinational division North was established in Latvia, which connects the control and command directly to the high command, alliance's high command. And this is again something that the aim is to kind of bring together, make the cooperation as such more smooth, which then kind of brings me to my third point. One of the challenges we have as a host nation is on how to actually entertain the troops here, because they don't only want to sit in the bases, but they want to actively be training and exercising as much as possible. And it has been a challenge because the question whether there are the training kind of exercise areas fit for what the allies and partners want to do is quite difficult, because they do have a different gear than we do. And so in that sense, that's another thing that I know that the EDF, the Estonian Defence Forces, is thinking a lot. Exercises are a big thing here, and especially with the EFB, a lot of the exercises are done on managing air support with the land forces, which for us, for the Estonian troops, of course, is a very important thing, because one part it is about holding the fort, but the other thing is that we don't really have such air defense capabilities to do it in such a level that they do it today. So I know that a lot of the exercises go around improving that. I know that from the other countries' side, in kind of more kind of political level, so Estonia has conscription right now, at least. I think so. Roughly 10,000 guys should go to do their service every year. Roughly a third goes. So right now the aim is to get it to half. So roughly kind of 5,000 guys, and also some girls. But again, infrastructure, you need to have places for those people to sleep and exercise, and also people who would train them. So I know that, but the EDF is very much kind of committed to increasing that number and prepare our own population to a potential conflict. A bit more about this kind of political side of it. So there has been a kind of awakening, I think, in the Baltic states in regards to when we think about, especially about NATO, that there is a need for this kind of 360 degrees NATO approach. We are very lucky to have so much attention to paid to us, and but at the same time, we do realize that our allies also somewhere else do need support. And so in that sense, and on the one hand, it seems very kind of abstract, but on the other hand, when you think about from the military and defense establishment side, it is a challenge, because we don't really know how to deal with those migrants, terrorism, so it's very kind of difficult, or it's quite challenging to figure out how exactly here the three Baltics could contribute to the kind of the 360 concept of NATO. So as such, in terms of spending, now all three countries spend over 2%, so it's not much, but I think as a commitment, and it is important. I think I'll let John to speak a bit more, and then we can talk about the worries and the gaps and the ideal world that we all would like to see here in the northeastern corner of Europe.
So John, over to you. I mean, maybe just to follow up on that, because I very much like what Piret said also about the 360 degrees. I mean, also, let's also be aware that also, I mean, in many ways, Russia is also there more than just, it's not present just on the eastern flank, right? I mean, we have certainly Russian troops in Syria, in Libya. We have constant harassment of air patrols, ships, certainly it's Russian espionage, information warfare, and so on. But that actually brings me to something that Piret said at the very beginning about in many ways. I mean, what you said was that it's really the classic dictum that to have peace, prepare for war, and I suppose my question to you, John, is has NATO actually been able to do that? And what kind of a war is NATO preparing for? I mean, to quote another old-fashioned dictum, that we're always preparing for the previous war. And in many ways, this is actually what I'm wondering. Now with the challenge we continue to face with Russia. I mean, are we responding to the challenge we are facing here and now, or are we actually responding to something in the past?
Oof, tough questions, Igor. Very tough.
It's supposed to be a challenging discussion.
Absolutely sure. Right. So before I start, even though the director did say that I could do this in uniform, I should of course give the standard caveat that whatever I'm saying is by no means the opinion of the Minister of Defense. Yada yada yada. Right. So I've checked that box. So now I'm mostly going to talk about from either my own experience in Lithuania. I was deployed there in 2017. And then for the past 3 years, I've been a planner at the Army headquarters, again involved on the dossier Enhanced World Presence. And on occasion, I've tried to write a few sensible and insensible things in a couple of magazine articles, those kind of things about EFP, about Stratcom at large. Right, so when I was deployed to Lithuania, it was very, very fresh. And when we talk about, right, what has NATO been doing in the past? Let's take 2004 as our starting point for when relations with neighboring country was souring. And as a response, that's when we had the Baltic Air Police coming up. But a lot of people didn't really know much about it. So we were doing Baltic Air Police and it was good. But at that time, NATO wasn't really communicating about these things yet. And if you compare it to how NATO is doing now, and you see the efforts of NATO SPOX and NATO PED, the Public Diplomacy Division, you'll see NATO being much more aware that they have to talk about what they're doing in order to actually give assurance. Because if you're doing stuff that's great, but you're not telling anyone about it, are you then really doing anything? The sort of the metaphor of the tree that fell in the forest, did it really fell or not? So there you see a big difference with EFP, with NATO being very aware, and then also the host nation countries and the contributing countries being very aware there's a need to talk about what you're doing. So I think that's already a big difference compared to previous operations of what is NATO doing. Then if you look at the operation itself, so we had the Will Summit 2016, we're talking about July, so midsummer when we said, right, we probably should be doing something like Enhanced World Presence. That seems like a good idea. All NATO allies agreed, or at least they didn't object against it. And then already in February 2017, so within 7 months, we had the first boots on the ground. And that for a military operation is actually quite amazing. So that's something that we often forget if we talk about, is NATO able to deliver, is NATO able to deploy as quickly as we say that we are? Well, in this case and point, yes, we are. And I think that's, again, very important for this whole message of both assurance and deterrence. If that would have taken, I don't know, years, and regularly we do say that for a deployment, if that's half a year deployment, then we want to start prepping half a year before that. We want to start planning a year before that. That's almost a range of almost 2 years. So then to do that in 7 months' time, that is quite amazing. It also, of course, brought with it a couple of issues where we said, right, we know there's going to be an issue. We know this is a question, but we don't have the time yet now to figure it out and to do that. So let's just go and we'll figure it out as we go. And you saw that, especially if I look at my own period, so that was the third rotation, end of 2017, there was still a lot of stuff that we were figuring out together with framework nation Germany and host nation Lithuania, where we weren't exactly sure yet, right, so who's going to be responsible? And then we're really talking about, I suppose that's also what Piret was mentioning, the basic stuff of, right, where is the lodging? We need extra barracks. Who's going to arrange that? How do we figure this all out? Rather simple stuff, but of course stuff that is very important for a military operation. Now, if we look at the whole deterrence itself, has NATO been successful in that? Well, for one thing, Russia hasn't invaded yet, so that's a check in the box. Good going for us. But I reckon if we talk it a bit bigger, the whole issue of deterrence and assurance, and we look at how now, in the report that was launched this morning by Mrs. Stoltenberg, looking at how people see NATO, and you see the rates of how the Baltics appreciate NATO, and we're talking about percentages of 80% and higher. I think that definitely is a guaranteed proof that says, right, people are happy with what we're doing here, because otherwise we wouldn't rate this high. I do feel that we could do more in that field and trying to figure out a bit more, what do people actually think about the deployment, indeed about going in rural Estonian or Lithuanian countries and suddenly bumping into an Englishman or Norwegian. Especially, I reckon in 2017, that was really weird. I hope now, 4 years later, people have a bit more understanding, but they could still very much be wondering, like, right, what is it you guys do here? And that's a very tricky part for the military. And sort of looking back on what you said about we tend to be good at the things that we used to be doing. This is not something that a military person is trained for. This is not what we train our soldiers for. We train our soldiers to you know, there's a reason why this uniform is supposed to look like a bit of a forest. I'm supposed to put on some smink and jump into a bush, and then no one is to see me. That's what I'm trained for. That's how we operate. So we operate in the rural area, in the forest, and so on. So now suddenly to be told by our commanders, like, right, now we need you actually to be on the square, and we need you to do a static display and then talk to the people and talk about what we're doing. For most soldiers, that's super awkward. And that is definitely something that, especially in 2017, we didn't prepare our people for at all. It is slowly going, and then there are slowly more people that are starting to embrace the whole public affairs side and the military public affairs side of all those things. But if there's one thing that we've learned over the 4 years, then it's definitely that. I see Piret definitely wants to respond to that.
Yes, because I think you bring out a very important point that is very funny to listen to as an Estonian citizen. So yes, the EFB forces also in Estonia are very worried about how are they perceived, and the questions. Because I'm a researcher, then I get this question almost every time I see someone in a military uniform, in a foreign military uniform, and for me it's such an odd question, because I'm like, why are you worried? We are so thankful that you are here. This is not an issue. Come more, come more, right? And so it is a very, very interesting thing. But I think what it kind of uncovers, which from our perspective, from the 3B perspective, is more important, is that does your public understand why you are in Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania? Because if your public doesn't support you, then it's very hard for you guys to be here. And so there is this kind of side to that what we are more worried about. And another thing I would kind of say from conversations with the deployed soldiers is also this kind of general awareness on what is the mission. So I understand that as a soldier, you're set, you are deployed and you go and you do what you're told. But there are reasons why these soldiers are here. And I found myself in kind of odd conversations about exactly this kind of, what is Russia doing? Why is EFP needed? And I think there is something that could be really improved upon in terms of when the soldiers do come here, that they really understand why it is important, that it is yet another deployment, but there is actually a bigger kind of reason behind it. And so that's kind of on the Stratcom part. Right, I'll finish now. I do want to talk about the worries and the gaps. But I finish here right now on this one.
Well, you know, I can imagine a lot of soldiers also being petrified when they come to Estonia because of the very short answers they normally get from Estonians. So they also wonder how Estonians feel.
You know what? The forces, there are 2 parades every year. The forces take part, they march with the Estonian forces, and later they, as John said, there is a display of all the gear usually in town centers, and it's so it's so cute to watch the awkward soldiers, some of the French who don't speak English that well, to lift up the kids on the gear to show them how to use this, how to use that. So yes, it's definitely a massive PR exercise, but honestly the soldiers are very approachable. If you want to get to know them, it's not particularly hard to do that.
Yeah, and you can always find them in plenty of bars in around Tallinn in evening. So before Corona, that was at least.
I'm not sure how much they're allowed to come to Tallinn, to be honest.
I had some good drinking sessions with them, I can tell you. But let me maybe move to Pavel, because I mean, we talked about the Baltic states, and Baltic states are one important part of the eastern flank, and certainly probably the most exposed part. But of course, eastern flank is much wider, and it goes all the way down to the Black Sea. And I suppose my question is also when it comes to countries like the Czech Republic, which, I mean, first of all, not to be picking on the Czech Republic, but it's not fulfilling its 2% criteria, which is one aspect. But there is also the other aspect that countries like the Czech Republic, or indeed Slovakia and so on, are also increasingly more and more targeted by, I mean, not just Russian disinformation campaigns, but actually also by sort of anti-democratic forces inside the countries. And in many ways this goes back to what Piret was saying about actually explaining back home the necessity of being having the soldiers in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Estonia, what is the threat, and why it is important to be prepared. And I'm wondering how much of a challenge that is in a country like the Czech Republic, which on one hand, I mean, it is a staunchly transatlantic country, but at the same time, it is really under this assault of both internal and external actors, which are challenging, this transatlantic conception, the democratic foundations. And I mean, there is this, of course, and I would really love to hear from you, maybe also about this new hybrid strategy that the government is preparing. But then at the same time, you have people like the president who are openly advocating for eternal friendships with authoritarian regimes, whether that's in Beijing or in Moscow. So, what kind of a challenge does this present actually to you? For not just for the defense of the eastern flank, but actually for the alliance as a whole.
Thank you so much, Igor. This is a very broad discussion, but I will try once again to divide it into different layers, as I was trying before with the threat, coming from Russia. So if we have a look at first the political level, indeed, this is somehow contested. You spoke about our dear President Miloš Zeman, who is from one hand, at least what he declares, a staunch supporter of the EU and NATO, but at the same time, he is the major proponent, obviously, of cooperation with Russia, China, and others. So definitely he's somehow fragmenting and somehow contesting some of the basic foreign policy, but also security postures of the country. So here the mixture is at least mixed. The picture is at least mixed. Even if the government, which is the key decision maker in the realm of foreign policy and security, here you can very much count on its Euro-Atlantic orientation. Even if there are many other issues related to our Prime Minister Andrej Babiš and his cabinet, then still here I think this is quite a solid vector, which leads me and brings me to the second very practical level of the cooperation, including with the Baltic states, in which the Czech Air Force is regularly doing the air policing that was mentioned by John, in which you have Czech soldiers actually stations in the region, stationed in the region. So you have also this very practical cooperation. You have very good and friendly relations with the Baltic states, very practical cooperation, I would say, and including here in Prague, where we have the 3 Baltic countries and their embassies very much open to our cooperation, and so this is all working very well on this practical level, I would say. And then finally, you have the level of the citizens, the social level. And here Czechia has one huge advantage, unlike, for example, in case of Slovakia, where the NATO membership, the NATO alliance as a whole is much more contested. In Czechia, we just several days ago, we actually celebrated 22 years since accession to NATO, and according to the most recent poll conducted by commissioned by the Minister of Defense, you have overwhelming majority of more than 70% of the Czech citizens actually are feeling positively about a membership and see the alliance as key like a guarantor of Czech stability and so on. So you have also this kind of level. If you asked about the opinion of the Czech citizen on Russia, on the developments in there, so that's still much more mixed, much more contested, from different reasons that I will not go into detail. But in any case, you have these pillars, that are in place, and this is a huge advantage, for example, of the Czech society. But what I want to speak also briefly, at least, about is the issue of resilience, because what Piret was mentioning, and it's all very much closely interconnected with the strategic communication. It's the social resilience, and it's also the deterrence, that Piret spoke about vis-a-vis Russia, and holding the fort, as she said, right? So you also need to invest really substantially in this domain of resilience, and we have just concluded one of our projects in Prague, actually, with the NATO public division, with which we cooperated on the topic of Czech resilience, and actually this concept in the wider region of Central and Eastern Europe. So in here you have major gaps, and this is probably also what Piret is going to talk about, when she finally starts on these gaps, because we have many actually in Czechia, and this is not only in the case and domain militarily, in this interoperability between forces, and building the infrastructure, as she spoke about here. Also, Czechia as a transport country is much having many problems there, actually, but also on the level of the Czech government and the society, when we speak about strategic communication, crisis management, also vis-a-vis, what we feel for what we all face these days, and that's why we are speaking only virtually today, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. We haven't really touched upon that so far, but this is a major challenge, obviously, that the third parties, including Russia, including China and others, that are then abusing against us, exploiting our weaknesses, and this is principle of resilience, as the EU and also NATO are promoting that, to really prepare the society to really tackle these external but also internal challenges, how to cope with them and so on. And here we have discovered also over the course of the project that we have had with NATO recently, that on the issue of for example, strategic communication and this crisis management, there are major weaknesses on the side of the Czech government, both in terms of the traditional stratcom and really speaking out and conveying the message to the Czech citizens, not only on COVID, but also on daily issues that they really have to cope with, but also in the domain of foreign and security policy, where the Czech government is really slow and only very in a fragmented matter, actually adopting to the communication in the 21st century to respond to the third-party narratives, including from Russia, China, and others, but also really to actually explain, what Piret was actually mentioning, why the Czech soldiers are stationed in the region, why we are sending our Gripen Air Force, to protect the Baltic countries, and so on and so forth. So here major weaknesses actually remain. So this was one of the conclusions of the projects. But here also we need to take into the picture of another strong another strength from the as seen from the Baltic states, and this is the not only strategic communication but also digital space, and regulation of the social media platforms and others, that are also were identified as major weaknesses of the Czech approach towards this broad area of resilience, and how to really get better and prepare better for these kind of challenges that we face these days, these weeks and months. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Pavel. And before I turn over to Piret, I just want to let everyone who would like to ask questions, I'd like to let you know that please feel free to write your questions in the Facebook comments box. I already see that there are some comments already coming through. So, and thankfully we are not being spammed today by Chinese accounts. So I'm actually able to see and monitor them. So please, feel free to submit them. I already see there are some questions already there. And while you're submitting questions, maybe I'll turn to Piret to talk about the gaps, because I think this is indeed an important part still of the discussion, because also as Pavel said, in terms of strategic communications, there are certainly gaps there. I mean, I remember 4 or 5 years ago in my previous job when we were holding a lot of round tables focusing on disinformation and sort of looking at the way disinformation is used to divide societies. I mean, it seems that we're still having the same discussions. Even 4 or 5 years ago, we understood the problem, but are we necessarily finding the solutions, or are we preparing to do what's required of us? And do you think, I mean, on the national level or on the NATO level, that we have sufficiently responded?
Right. Is that about strategic communications or?
Strategic communications, but I'm happy to, also, I mean, it would be very good, I think, to focus on strategic communications, but I think also sort of broader gaps. I think also in terms of defense and security, I think it would be good to hear from that as well. Okay,
if you talk about defense and security, then it's never enough, so that's like kind of like you can go crazy, and I've been on I think one of the funniest moments in my kind of meetings has been when one general started his kind of explaining his position, and he had to say that I'm not asking for money. Right, so in that sense, like, it's a black hole. You can just throw money into it, and you can always find something new to kind of figure out. Right, okay. I'll just start with the things I kind of thought about while preparing. One, I'm tad worried about the kind of the political decisiveness in the three Baltic countries, and the reason why I'm saying this is because when COVID hit, the cooperation was great. I wrote a study on it, and it is really exceptional to what extent the three countries in civil affairs, which is not an affair where we're have exercised and cooperated as much as we do in military affairs, how well that cooperation actually came together. Of course, you can always do more, but but by and large, it was really great. But what we don't really do in military affairs is that, yes, the militaries exercise, and usually they exercise with rest of the alliance, and also have to say with the partners of the alliance, because Sweden and Finland, despite not being members, are sometimes, I feel that they are more in NATO. That does not apply to Sweden that much, but in Finnish case, I sometimes feel that they're more in NATO than the members themselves. So they know it so well, and I think that's partly due to the fact that if you're an outsider, you need to know your partner's game or the group's game better than they do. So they're very close. But what kind of worries me when I look at how the political leadership works right now is exactly this decisiveness, because to some extent this crisis right now gives you the sense of how well your institutions and your political elite manages to make the decisions in difficult times. And we don't really exercise that kind of, we don't really do any kind of political exercises among like the three. So if a crisis hits, what is the first thing? Do we run to NAC immediately, or do we kind of try to coordinate among ourselves? What is the kind of, and how do we decide, and what are the bases of how we decide? And so that's something that I'm kind of increasingly worried about, especially having seen how long decisions on restrictions and how to manage the pandemic take already in our own government. So if you add the kind of the regional, you have to also kind of other actors to it, regional actors, then it gets even more complicated. And that's something that kind of, I would say, is something that I think we need to kind of figure out here in this region. But kind of moving on to more kind of NATO level. So in a crisis situation, what time will be our kind of the worst enemy in that sense. So right now, from the 3B side, it is all about trying to ensure that the reinforcements from the allies would come to the region, and this is why it is very sad that the Defender Europe 2020 exercise didn't go through. I hope that when we get back to in the new normal, or whatever term we find for this time, that this idea to do the exercise still will go into the plans, because this is really what it's about. We can, is it 60 days, is it 3 days? We cannot fight that fight alone, and we need support. And the faster the support comes, the smoother the support comes, the more likely it is that we will win this fight. So in that sense, that's something that we talk a lot about and worry about a lot, and really hope that NATO will manage to come together on this and really exercise, because this, you only know your faults when you exercise, otherwise you will never get to know them. Then, of course, from the three Baltics side, the big gap is in maritime and air defense. This is something that what we do now is very land focused. I've heard arguments on both sides whether it should be the case or should not be the case. But the matter of the fact is that maintaining maritime and air defense is very expensive, to which the three Baltics themselves definitely do not have the financial resources for, at least to the extent that we need. Baltic Air Mission is here. We're very happy about it. But now the next question is, could that mission to be turned into a defensive mission if needed, and how that would happen, because it is a peacetime mission, and so there are questions around that one. Now, kind of another thing that you can hear Estonians and probably other Balts talking quite a lot about is still getting the US troops here on a permanent basis. This is something that, again, I've heard arguments on both sides whether this is possible or not, but it is a thing that the Ministry of Defence is quite committed to, and I think if there's one thing that the 3 Baltic states have learned from the past 30 years, is that if you don't ask, then you definitely don't get it either. You know, because if you would have listened the 1990s, we would never make it to NATO. But the reason why we made it was that we didn't give up, and it was our goal. So we'll see. Fourth, I would mention what kind of, and now we're kind of going into more bigger strategic issues, is the whole arms control question, which kind of goes over our heads, but we would really like to see also our allies who actually have a hand on this matter to not to give up on this, because if you look at the balance of power, then I think the arms control measures will help us more than the enemy. So kind of just leave it here on that one. We are very kind of, as I said, 360 is something that we are aware. We are aware also that China is the upcoming new threat. But still, the question for us is, how do you still keep the focus on the East? Because when in 2004 we joined, we experienced it, what it means when you're not in the focus. And then 2014 happened and we became the focus. So now the question is, if something new comes, or there becomes a competition between threats, how are you still competitive as such, so that the attention wouldn't go away? So I think this is a big kind of thing to question, to figure out. And now in my kind of more kind of researcher view, I really worry about NATO's health. Because I don't of course the US is back. We'll see on how and what they will do, but you still have Turkey, and you have France, who definitely is committed to NATO, but sometimes I do question their motives there, and for us, you know, there is no replacement to NATO. We can talk about building something, not alternative, but additional measures next to NATO. Yes, but they get, you know, viable in 20, 30 years time. And I just recently had a discussion about it, and I'm like, you know, in Estonia we think about the future, but the presence is always here. And I feel that sometimes with our allies, they don't understand that our kind of pessimism towards any kind of new great ideas is to do with the fact that for us, we think about the tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. In 20 years' time, that's more in abstract terms. And so that's something. And I kind of finally would kind of to tie together with what Pavel started on kind of Russia, and to what also you said. I haven't had the time really read the integrated review. I listened to the the House of Commons debate on it, but Russia is #1 threat, okay, to UK. But what does it mean? Because on the one, because and I think one of the things that when we talk about Russia policy is that is starting to get a bit frustrating, is that, okay, it is where is the comprehensiveness of it, right? On the one hand, you say it's a threat. On the other hand, you allow Russian oligarchs and all sorts of criminals funnel money through your financial system. You know, so, and I think that's something when we kind of talk about the 3B, looking at what the European and other countries' Russia policies, is what we get frustrated about, is that it's okay, like your big countries, you do your own policy, but at least be consistent about it. And so we'll see what the US will do. Definitely something that we look very closely to. But I'm very interested to see what the review on the SolarWind hack will come up with, and what the reaction to that will be. Because what you feel is that you're kind of frogs in the water, and the temperature of the water is starting getting higher and higher, and we're not really kind of adding any cold water right now. So we'll see, but we'll try to do our best.
Well, but I mean, if I can maybe just ask you a follow-up question on that, because
Sure.
this sort of brings a wider problem, and that's a question of threat perception. And clearly, you see this also within the European Union. I mean, you see this discussion with Borrell's trip to Moscow, with the discussions about sanctions. I mean, it's clearly a big difference, or certainly a significant difference in terms of threat perception between different member states. And quite frankly, every time some Western European countries like France complain about Central Eastern European countries that because they scream Russia too much, well, I mean, I'm sorry, but generally Central Eastern European countries tend to be proved right at the end when it comes to this. But my question to you is, I mean, do you think actually we've reached a stage where that threat perception is so significantly different that it's actually harming our ability to respond and really be prepared to face this threat?
I think I don't agree with you 100%. I think the threat perception as such is coming more closer, because France and President Macron, they understand that Russia is a problem. Like I don't think, and this is something that I've just recently had this discussion. So it feels like, it's like when you see red car somewhere, then you keep seeing red cars everywhere, and I kind of have this moment right now. But so I don't. Yes, of course, varying levels of how we assess Russia's threat, but I think fundamentally everybody agrees that it is some kind of a threat. I think where we differ about it is in how do we go about it. And this is where you get to this discussion, like, should we talk to Russia, or should we kind of cut our contacts, and so on and so forth. And this is what I think brings up the kind of the foggy or muddy water a bit. So yeah, and again, like, and I think when I kind of think about how we respond to Russia, to be honest, I don't think we really know what to do anymore, because the threat is so, the Russian threat is so diverse. There is the cyber side to it, there is the more conventional side to it, there's the Stratcom side to it. And I've been to this Russia kind of discussions where everyone's looking for this kind of one magic bullet that will solve all of these issues. And I think I'm not sure, but it seems to me that to some extent the French push to have a dialogue with Russia is kind of delivered by this, like, we don't know what else to do anymore. So maybe, talking to Russia is the silver bullet that solves all the problems. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to take a position on that. But there is, I think there is this kind of, to some extent, is like, we don't know what to do anymore. So, let's talk. And then you kind of get to this, okay, it's a number one threat, but what does it mean? Are you actually ready to go to that length that you kind of sort out in every area where Russia is a threat? You kind of put a red flag up, and then you kind of see, like, no, not really. So it's very complicated. That's all I could say.
Pavel, maybe I'll jump to you, because you also, I think, wanted to jump in on the I think cyber, if I'm correct, or hybrid threat. Sorry, I apologize.
Yes, but more broadly, I would not say, Piret, that it is very complicated. I think we just need to really do what is long overdue, which is to take these issues seriously. You are speaking about this number of areas, but without starting to really deal with them properly. And I mean here, obviously, you spoke about cyber, but this is to do also with other malign activities. This is money laundering that you referred to also in London, Londongrad, this famous city, and others. And without focusing really on this resilience, we will not be able to move any further. And I feel that this need and understanding that we really need to change things, it's already there. You spoke about how, you know, this might be different, you know, from you know, cities in Western Europe and then Baltic states, but sorry, I can't agree. If you have a look at some of the research and investigative journalism, you know, speaking about you know, Russian laundromat, you know, and then you have a look at how much money actually went through Latvian and Estonian banks. This is incredible, and we really need to focus on this very much. You know, I feel that also with the upcoming European Council meeting at the end of this month, you know, on the EU level at least, I'm speaking, there is this realization that we really have serious problems. You know, we have internal problems, which is, you know, this is corruption related, but this is also security very much related, as you spoke about cyber resilience. This is so much of daily bread to us these days that we really need to invest a lot, you know, and the sooner we start doing that, the better. And I think the realization is there. You spoke about how to keep the East on the agenda. I don't think that's gonna ever disappear, because it is just so much more of a threat to us in Europe, unlike China. I feel, you know, that this is not an issue. There is no dilemma from my perspective. You know, it's just a question if we are strong and consistent and, you know, sort of decided enough, you know, that we are ready to invest in this. This is a question of political will. I think we are slowly but surely getting there, and I hope the European Council meeting on the 28th and 25th and 26th of March will actually help us there, which will be dealing primarily with this resilience towards Russian threat, because nobody is, at least from the, you know, Boros circle, at least from our countries, you know, really speaking about substantial engagement with Russia, you know, beyond the needed issues. You know, there are, you know, here and there, you know, voices. Yes, why not to open debates about climate? We hear that from Germany. We hear other things about, you know, about how to best, you know, position ourselves, you know, vis-a-vis Russia from Cyprus. We hear also occasional voices from the institution, but overall, everybody understands, you know, in Germany, in France, that this division in the Western and EU foreign policy on Russia is not sustainable anymore. That's why the French canceled their bilateral dialogue. That's why the Czechs canceled their bilateral dialogues. That's why, you know, there is so much pressure domestically in Germany, you know, to stop Nord Stream 2, which might be a question of several months, and the upcoming parliamentary vote. You know, I'm quite hopeful in there. So let's see about this. But I don't think we are really going anywhere else. We are so much, you know, how to say, fragmented or in a dilemma if to speak about Russia, if to tackle this. I think everybody understands that this is a problem. You know, when we have shooting in the middle of Berlin, you know, during the daylight, and you assassinate, you know, your enemies, this is a serious threat to everybody. Everybody understands that. I think this is a question of resources. It's a question of political will, and it is a question of our consensus, you know, and moving to EU common interest rather than the national and particular ones, you know. So here I would somehow disagree with you, at least partially. I know that on so many accounts you would subscribe to this as well, I believe.
But Pavel, can I ask you a quick question, if I can?
Go ahead.
I mean, to me, the question that strikes me here, you know, is then the bigger danger, you know, the military, the informational aspect, or is it actually the bigger danger is the fact that we actually do not have anybody on the other side to speak to? That actually, you know, when it comes to dialogue or diffusing a potential crisis, there isn't necessarily a specific Russian individual that we can quite frankly call and know that we have a reliable partner there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, and I wanted to add that as a second element to our discussion in the EU, but also on the NATO side, you know, that there's simply nobody to talk to. You know, we saw that after the Boros visit, you know, with all the diplomatic slaps, you know, from Mr. Lavrov, you know, but there is also, you know, follow-up statements, you know, after the visit and meeting with the Finnish foreign minister, you know, where Sergei Lavrov openly spoke about about, that Russia, first of all, that Russia is ready for breakup of any relations with the EU, and secondly that he is not, and the Russian diplomat is not interested in talking to Europe at all. So there is nobody, literally nobody on the Russian side, at least on the regime side, to really speak about these issues. You can do things here and there, for example, Americans showed us a way, when it comes to the nuclear area, and really to limit the most fundamental and to stick to the most fundamental issues here. But from my perspective, we need to be doing something else, which is to fully institutionalize the dual track policy, which is resilience towards the regime, but then as much as is possible and politically feasible to reach out to the Russian citizens. We really need to be going two separate tracks, be ambitious on the society, independent media, Russian opposition level, but then again, be resilient as much as we can, towards the regime. So I think we need to institutionalize this as much as we can. And the the European Council on Russia, actually, towards the end of this month, might be the first the very important moment in this regard. So I definitely agree with you, Igor, on this one, but the more we need to be talking to somebody who is willing to listen, and this is not definitely the Russian regime. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavel. And maybe at this point, it might be good to take some of the questions that have been submitted. And first of all, maybe I'll start with a question from Philip Valchak, who's asking us about the Russian minority in the Baltic countries and how they are reacting to NATO presence and NATO activities as such. And I don't want this to get into the debate that usually ends up in focusing on Narva, because I know how people usually start rolling their eyes when Western Europeans start reducing the whole Russian minority question to Narva. But maybe a question there, a part of the question there for John, in terms of the EFP. Has there been actually a focus within the EFP, within the Stratcom dimension, specifically focusing on the minorities within the Baltic states, or in fact, has there not? Has there been any outreach, or communication, etc.? And a question to you, Piret, because for example, I know Estonia has been actually quite active over the last few years in trying to really create a lot of integration projects, and not just with Russian minorities, but generally trying to focus on societal resilience. And I know you guys at ICDS have been doing a lot of work on that. So I wonder if you can maybe tell us a little bit, maybe in what ways do you think, for example, Estonia has succeeded in sort of creating a more societal resilience, helping to also bring the minorities more together, or perhaps what gaps do you see? But maybe John, let's start with you. I'd be curious to hear from you.
All right, so again, caveats, and this might all be just semantics for most of the people, but I do think it's a very important distinguishing element there. So when we talk about outreach and engagement in these kind of projects, this is all within, at least for the military side, and in military public affairs, and really a host nation task rather than something that we would do. When you talk about strategic communication or outreach or engagement that really comes from the military, you're talking about the field of psychological warfare. And that is something that NATO, of course, also does, but very important, not on its own citizenship. And that makes EFP really weird because, for example, in Afghanistan, that's then denounced as an area of military operations. And then the North Atlantic Council, in this case, gives their fiat for saying, right, yes, you can try and influence local Afghans, because we want to reach out to them and we want to tell them that Taliban is not in the best interest and they should come and talk to us. So in Afghanistan, that's fine. But now we are deployed in countries that are part of NATO itself. So it's our own citizenship. So then we can't do that. So we really are depending on host nation support. really on public affairs. And then sure, you do organize, I don't know, like a fair or a civil military kind of interaction project. I recall at one point, back when I was deployed, there was a hospital that needed renovation. We actually had people from our engineer corps walking around there. They were not doing anything. So we had them help out and do these kind of projects. But that's really is then a gray area. You have to be very careful of what is exactly that you're doing. But of course, with the idea to create a bit of goodwill, to have our commander then talk to the local mayor. In this case, it was in Piret, which is next to the training area. So these are the people that, well, I don't want to say that we are a nuisance to them, but with the presence of EFP there, and then the exercise area being used more often than regularly was the case, sure, they would have questions about what's going on and what's all the military things doing there. And now it happens to be that Piret is indeed one of these Russian diaspora areas in Lithuania. So yeah, sure, we are doing a couple of things in that field, but it's very, very limited to what I said, these public affairs things, fairs, static shows, sports games between the military soldiers and locals, and these kind of activities. That's sort of what we're thinking about.
Piret.
Right. Very complicated question, because when we talk about the Russian minority, then the whole overall Estonia's and also Latvia's integration policy is one of complicated topics. So now when you kind of take one difficult thing and then try to extract one part of it out of it, then you may kind of misrepresent the picture, the overall picture. So when we talk about Russian minority in the Baltic countries, we talk about Estonia and Latvia. There isn't a significant one in Lithuania, so that to make that distinction. And I don't know them by heart, but as John said, that usually the support to EFP forces is roughly around 80 to 90%. So I know that in these questionnaires they do check the temperature of also the Russian Estonian community, and I don't know, for some reason I have like some 60% in my head, but I'm not 100% sure. But as far as I know, I think those studies are also available on Estonia's Ministry of Defense website, so you can kind of go and look up. But let's say there isn't, as far as I know, such opposition to specifically EFP forces to which we would be terribly worried about. And I think that also partly comes to the fact that you have to look into the Estonian Russian community, seeing like who are those people, and then you discover that many of them are born here and Estonia is their home, and yes, there's a complicated past, there's a bit more also complicated future, but fundamentally this is their home, and they are interested in having that protected just as much as we do. But just kind of maybe like to also go back to Pavel's previous point, and why I'm still going to insist that this is difficult. For instance, let's talk about disinformation, or where the Estonian Russian community gets information from. Many of them watch Russian TV, and okay, now there is an Estonian alternative to that, but that is only one channel. And what do? You don't go to people's homes and say that you're only allowed to watch Estonian channels verified by the Estonian government. And we can see that, you know, there are stories that the people in the eastern part of Estonia are asking for the Sputnik vaccine, and are refusing to take in vaccines from the other types of vaccines. And so, you know, what percentages, how factual it is, that's, you know, I'm not sure, but this is the story out there. And so what do you do? And you can put your political will into it and put money into it, but these things definitely don't change overnight. And in a time of crisis, what you don't have is time. So in that sense, issue is there, but but yeah, we're trying to do our best. But in terms of like the EFP forces, they are actually based in the eastern part of Estonia, that also has the highest concentration of the Russian-speaking minority. So in that sense, you know, if anyone has close contact with EFP forces, it's actually them.
Thanks, Piret. And maybe Pavel, I'll switch to you, but I want to change the topic a little bit, because I mean, let's also maybe talk about, you know, the shared neighborhood, because that's also an important part to this story. And you know, and there was a very interesting paper actually written, I think maybe a month ago, by Nico Popescu from ECFR, who suggested this idea of security compacts with our eastern neighbors. Now, I mean, it's a good, I mean, on the paper, it's a good idea, but of course, also when we see the state of the neighborhood and, you know, the neighboring countries, it's, you know, with Belarus and also with Armenia, Azerbaijan, it certainly opens a lot of questions. And I mean, also the presence of Russian troops in Transnistria. But I mean, to what extent do you think actually, you know, the importance, you know, I mean, first of all, do you think there is a viable argument to be had about such security compacts and more security and defense cooperation with the Eastern partners, also to boost the Eastern flank? And you know, second of all, does it put them actually in a more, does it theoretically actually help their security, or in fact, does it worsen their own security arrangements?
Thank you so much, Igor, also for bringing this up, because I think any discussion about, you know, our own security would not really be complete without, you know, the neighborhood. I think this is a crucial point. First, maybe let me start on what is also relevant for our discussion on Baltics, you know, and their own security and enhanced forward presence, which is obviously the situation in Belarus, you know, which is very much worrisome, which is, you know, we know that Russia is for years interested in establishing a fully fledged military bases in Belarus. You know, that's why we were calling for really paying a very close attention from the Czech side, but also from the EU and NATO side, you know, on the developments in the region. The NATO alliance was mostly silent on Belarus, you know, beyond strategic communication related to immediate disinformation, you know, on there is NATO force mobilizing on your borders, you know, to invade and so on and so forth. Here, yes, NATO went in there and debunked some of the fake news and so on, but there was very little beyond that, at least officially over the last couple of months. Obviously, you have the whole kind of physical presence as we were discussing earlier, but I think there is a need to do much more also, you know, to actually speak to our allies, you know, from the Baltic states, you know, on this question, because the military posture and the balance in the region might be fundamentally actually shifted by establishing maybe potentially a new military basis in Belarus. You know, there are plans to host a huge you know, Zapad, this West, you know, exercise this year, you know, between Belarus, and Russia. So there are these really bad tendencies, you know, also when it comes to the integration of the two countries. Obviously here, Belarus is the weak partner and Russia the one dictating on so many levels its conditions. So here we really need to follow this very, very carefully. And I would be fully in favor of actually stepping up our presence in relation to any change of the situation military-wise in Belarus itself, you know, to really be prepared if we have a new military base of Russia in Belarus, then let's react immediately. Let's pre-negotiate a consensus among the members of the alliance, and then really act on this one. So I think there is a lot of homework that we need to do also on this high-level negotiating side. Secondly, and I think this is the same interesting and important, this is obviously the three associated countries, members of the EU, speaking about Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. Here, the Nicu Popescu paper is actually going above all, be applied to them. I think this is a very meaningful area of cooperation. Obviously, we know that there, which is related to the EU above all, but at the same time, I think we are beyond this very strict reluctance in when engaging in any sense of the word military on the EU side. I think we started to discuss about it much more frequently. On the side of the EU institutions, we feel that there is this willingness along the lines of this very broad concept of resilience, which should be a new framework for EU relations with the partner countries, including the three associated ones. I feel that there is willingness to do more. When you speak to people from EES, when you speak to people from the Commission, they say, yes, we would be very, very happy to do that. But obviously, then the question is in the Council on the consensus among the member states, how far to go. But at least what is in there, and I think the member states will broadly agree to that, is to integrate the three associated countries much more closer into what we have already established on the EU side, which is the Stratcom task force in Brussels. We have the hybrid threat center of excellency in Helsinki, and we also have the ENISA for cyber established in Milan in Italy. So I feel that there's this willingness to invite these partners to actually participate, at least on an ad hoc basis, in our own kind of level of being prepared to face these challenges, so to exchange best practice, to actually provide training, provide capacity building, and to have this mutual channel of exchange, because we can be learning really great loads of information from Ukrainians when facing the Russian disinformation, and hybrid threats on a daily basis. Really, we do that similarly, but still to a lesser degree in Czechia and elsewhere in the EU. So I feel that the willingness is there. I feel that also NATO is going this way. It has its offices in Kiev, in Tbilisi, to less of a degree in Moldova, which officially is independent state from a military position. So here the debate and dynamics is a little bit different, but you see there's a huge appetite from the partner countries to do more, to be more integrated with the EU, with NATO. So I think the understanding and the willingness is slowly but surely coming to place when it comes to also really working much closer together. The Warsaw Summit of 2016 on the NATO side actually showed the way to this, when it comes to future engagement between NATO and Ukraine. I think that was a significant first, declaratory step to that. And I think we are slowly but surely moving in that regard further. Same goes for Georgia. So I think, we are slow in this regard, but we are going this way. But still, let's see what actually the October summit of the Eastern Partnership actually brings, and what set of future deliverables will be in place when it comes to integration of especially the three associated countries closer with the EU. Thank you.
And absolutely, and I mean, the countries are also part of the partnership for peace. So I think that's also a very important, brings open a lot of important questions about more cooperations and synergies between the EU and NATO. So I fully agree with you there. Listen, I would really love to continue this discussion, because on one hand, I feel like we've touched on so many issues, a lot of issues, but in fact, there are so many issues which we haven't touched upon. And even though we've really gone from one topic to another, I think we could easily have another 3 or 4 discussions out of this easily, and because we haven't even scratched the surface. But the good thing about this discussion series is that it's open-ended, and I hope that we can sometimes in the near future have a follow-up. And I certainly hope that that follow-up will not just be online, but also have a hybrid format, and we'll be able to meet up and continue the discussion also face-to-face, and have a drink afterwards as well, of course, as is usually the case. But on that note, let me say thank you very much to all 3 of you, Piret, John, Pavel. It's really been a pleasure to have you. I really enjoyed the discussion. Unfortunately, it went way too fast, and there's so many more things I would have loved to ask you about and discuss with you. So let me thank you very much again. Thank you to everyone who joined us on Facebook. I apologize to those of you whose questions we haven't been able to answer, but I hope we can do that soon. And maybe also good news for those of you who are following this discussion series. Our next discussion series will be focused on NATO's southern flank. So there's another possibility to talk about the challenges, threats the alliance is facing there, and also see how that also connects to the challenges we are facing on the eastern flank, and indeed the wider 360 degrees angle. So on that note, let me thank you all very much again. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope we'll have another discussion sometimes again soon. So thank you, and talk to you soon.